Hello. So I'll try the teacher voice. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for having me. As we're presenting today to a multilingual audience, and we're being translated as we speak, I've tried to take this into account in my presentation. So for English speakers in this hall, please forgive me if I sometimes read key parts of the quotes that are on the slide for this very reason. Before I start, I'd just like you to give a big wave up there to Akiko, who's actually translating the talk for the room on the other side. So a big round of applause and many thanks. So the last ATypI conference I was at was in 2006 in Warsaw. And I spoke about building a typography for India during this time. In these past 3 years, through various critical reflections, I have cautiously been able to add one more word to the research project. And that word is new. Where's Jason? He stole it from me. So 3 years, one word. As you can see, I'm working very hard. This is what we academics in the UK do to avoid Brexit. We bury ourselves and try to find words to express the situation. We need help. Send help, please. But joking aside, this word is important. Why is new needed? What is new? How can we frame this new, which is perhaps actually not so new? This is what this paper is about. In the interest of time, I will focus on giving you some background, brief highlights of the journey, and 3 examples of this potential newness. Before I go any further, I should clarify 2 words that are important to this presentation: typography and India. As a typographer and graphic designer who works primarily with text, when I say the word typography, I mean design for reading. Now, this might seem unnecessary to state in a conference such as this, but I often hear type designers and historians emphasize the importance of written text and of writing. As a typographer, my concern is less with writing and more with the reading of text, often in multiple languages, by readers with different language capabilities and fluencies in very varied environments. Now, when we talk about typography, I should also note something that's fundamental to the research here. Whilst I acknowledge the importance of typography as a craft, I'm interested in how we can use typography as a fundamental way to understand and engage with the world in both mainstream or known ways, but as well as experimental, marginalized, and messy ways. So to speak about the second word, India. When I speak about a new typography for India, I do not mean a national approach or a geographical territory. As Priya Joshi has noted, to conceive of India as a discrete national identity or limited geographical space is a grave error, especially when it comes to studying the circulation of print and ideas. In the period of my study, which extends from 261 BCE to the present day, the shape and context of India is not the India as we know it today. It was precolonial, colonial, postcolonial, and modern. I am interested in using India as a framework in the manner suggested by Chris Binney. India, or indeed South Asia, becomes a site of investigation in which you can develop a new model that is transportable. How might things that have happened or are happening in the Indian context be translatable or relatable elsewhere? And this, in essence, encapsulates the approach to building a typographic heritage. I'm going to stop here and give you a brief background to a project that some of you have heard me speak about before. In the past 5 years, some of us in this room have had the honor of working on a unique 100-year publishing project called the Murthy Classical Library of India. This has led to the need to build a theoretical, historical, practical model for India's typographic heritage. The journey is also very personal to me. Like many urban Indians, including Rohan Murthy, who founded this library, I had an anglicized education. I was taught in English in school. I did A and O-level exams, and I did not ever, during that period of time, have the opportunity to study my own heritage during my education, because none of those texts were available. The Murthy Classical Library of India aims to make available and accessible the great literary works of India for the past 2 millennia, and available to a global audience. To put it more bluntly, after 72 years of independence, India is still recovering from its colonial past. As Stoller has noted, colonialism instigates a condition of ongoing ruination that needs to be acknowledged. We need more libraries with intentions such as Murthy's to recover this mostly forgotten heritage. There were several design challenges in this project. The first was a commissioned series of Murthy typefaces with extensive character sets, some close to 1,500, designed by Fiona Ross and John Hudson. We also used Thetis' Naseem and Decotype's Nastali. Often multilingual typefaces, which aim to work with text, as Thetis has pointed out, try to translate style, size, or color. They try to harmonize or match the so-called non-Latin with the Latin. But here, there was a priority that was given to actually letting the typefaces stand on their own without kind of deferring too much to the Latin. With regards to the text and the typographical design, this is a bilingual facing page translation series for readers of multiple language fluencies. They could be first language speakers, second language speakers, third language speakers, or not know English at all. And they all had to feel welcome in the text. We found that the best method to approach the design was to embrace the different lengths of language, which made irregular settings in multiple script editions more feasible. This also meant that the characteristics of the script called for greater interlinear space and sometimes a larger body size as well. As Thesis describes again, bilingual editions achieve better text synchronization, page to page, if type size and interlinear space are not identical, but chosen to the best effect of each script with the reader in mind. A second issue we came across is one that's pointed out by Vaibhav Singh in recent writings. In a multi-script setting that demands a greater level of articulation and differentiation in hierarchy, the devices that we use in English text, like bold, small capitals, italics, letter spacing, present a challenge in terms of representing the same information in other languages. So we took an approach not to mimic the hierarchies, but to be true to the heritage of the scripts and to work with those constraints of that in the design. In the process of the design, we realized that there are no published, accepted, agreed standards or guidelines for typographic setting in Indian languages. The project relies heavily on primary archival research and secondary materials to guide the design. A part of this project, therefore, became about researching and building those guidelines and then making them available freely. Whilst there is substantial progress in recent years in the availability of robust, good quality typefaces for Indian languages, these serve a limited purpose without clear typographic guidelines for use. As we know, the Indian subcontinent is home to a rich diversity of languages and scripts. A recent census of languages tells us that there are over 1,500 languages and dialects spoken, and more than 20 of these possessing more than 1 million speakers each. There is still so much work to be done. While conducting the research, we had to be really careful to pull out implicit understandings of how the text should be set. If it felt like we were building something new, this was not the case. We were instead reforming what existed for today's reader in a multilingual and intercultural context. As Fraser notes, these books already existed as fully formed texts before the printing press turned them into books. In the School of Communication at the Royal College of Art in London, where I work, we often have an existential crisis. We discuss our role, this tension between who we are, where we have been educated, how we speak about knowledge, our presence in an elite colonial institution, with focus on the work that needs to be done in the world. What role are we going to play? How do we do this? And we believe that the first step is to confront our own biases, conscious and unconscious, that we carry with us that shape our view of the world. Here is a small example. This is a public artwork that's installed near King's College, London. It's a sculpture by Mark Wallinger. Now take a close look at it, and you can see Japan on the lower left of the sculpture. But what was the first thought that came into your mind when you saw that? It's upside down. Is it really upside down? Can the globe be upside down? No. So how has our view of the world been conditioned? And could we be doing the same thing in our subject and discipline? Here is another example. This is a photograph of the Earth taken by the Apollo 17 crew in December 1972. Now, before circulating the image, the photograph was rotated so that Antarctica could be at the bottom in its right place. Now, if you look closely at the bottom left, if I can see it there, there is a cyclone developing in Tamil Nadu, India, where I'm from. And for me, this image represents the inequalities of the world and the task before us to bridge these inequalities. On the one hand, you have a momentous progress for humanity in outer space and a photograph that captures it. And in the other, you have a cyclone that wipes out a rural population and their livelihood on the same day. We live in an age of huge human migration and increasing right-wing politics. As Boaventura de Sousa Santos has strongly summarized, we live in a period in which the most morally repugnant forms of social inequality and social discrimination are becoming politically acceptable. You might ask, what does this have to do with us? We could begin, each of us, by acknowledging our lopsided approach to our subject. For example, when I did my master's at Central St. Martin's in London, I read the works of Marshall McLuhan and Elizabeth Eisenstein, who spoke of printing as a revolutionary agent of change that swept across Europe to the rest of the world. I studied Stanley Morrison's First Principles of Typography, which claimed, in effect, that this was really the only way that a book could be designed. But we know a different story. We know that printing predates Gutenberg, not only by the means of xylography, whose use within China spread from at least 1700 CE, but also by movable type in East Asia and metal type in Korea in the 16th century. In the Indian subcontinent, xylography was known long before the Jesuits introduced hand presses to South India. The astronomy of print does not describe an outwardly expanding galaxy as suggested by McLuhan, but a universe with multiple points of origin, a pluriverse if you'd like it. We need to rethink about what we take to be accepted histories. As the wonderful Graham Shaw says, first, there is no small matter of a large proportion of the globe with long-established text traditions that are being largely ignored, except insofar as they have impinged upon the European and North American publishing history, primarily as lucrative export markets. Santos notes that the South is the problem and the North is seen to provide the solution. So the implication is there is only one valid understanding of the world. He notes, the metropolitan world is the world of equivalence among us and are like us, fully human. The colonial world, the world of colonial sociability, is the world of them. With no equivalence, they're not fully human. In our subject, you could call this Latin and non-Latin. Current custom and practice of designing in the South is very largely based on perspectives received from the North. Design for and by the South cannot be totally free, as Tony Fry tells us, from such thinking, but needs to challenge, contest, adopt it consciously, critically, and selectively, learn from it, but critique it based on context. In looking for a new approach to the histories and theories and methods of typographic practice, I found some basic principles to begin to build a new typography. And given the time left, I'd like to share 3 thoughts with you. Let us consider what is the majority of our knowledge built on. A new typography acknowledges all periods of textual history, not just the dominant or the easily accessible. This is Robert Fraser's timeline of textual history in India. It starts with the first identified inscriptions, Ashokas, which date from 260 BCE. The British colonial era dates from the annexation of Bengal in 1756, independence of India in August 1947, not 48. Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children is published in 1981, marking the inception of modern Indian literature. But many of the resources and references that inform the work in type design and typography in the Indian subcontinent come from a written history that's almost entirely colonial or immediately post-colonial. As Fiona Ross has noted, manuscript scriptoria were displaced in South Asia by the introduction of European type founding and print technologies. It can be said that the current Indian script type forms still owe much to the forms initiated in metal, usually by foreign hands and methods. Also, the role of print in South Asian culture has reinforced the presence of both alternative writing systems and the ways in which they impinge on one another. For example, until the 19th century, Assamese literature was written down in Assamese script. Following the intervention of US missionaries in Upper Assam, in the name of standardization, Bangla began to replace Assamese. Now, Tyler Williams writes that in the process of Hindi emerging as a textual medium, there's an examination of formats, patterns of page sizes, impagination. Early regional manuscripts are making a process of adaptation and experimentation visible. It brings to light the relationship between different kinds of manuscript formats and different kinds of circulation, from notebooks copied for individual use, collections of loose folios for circulation, some for elite monks, and others that are bound holy books taken around lay devotees. In India, reading is a public and social activity. Benedict Anderson proclaims that reading is a private activity invisible from public scrutiny or intrusion. This is not the case in India, where there was, and still is, a sophisticated oral culture and a belief that unscripted communication is still seen as an index of one's innate ability, as well as a belief that while what is written can always be read, what is meant to be heard must be spoken and lived. The 4 Vedas were authored in 1500 BCE. They were transmitted orally from generation to generation. The Rig Veda, which has 1,028 hymns in over 10,000 verses of 4 lines each, has been orally preserved for 3.5 millennia. Not only do the words need to be repeated exactly, but there is a particular rhythm, cadence, and sonority that needs to be replicated if the verses are to carry their spiritual charge. You can see here the underlining of the red to give emphasis. The sounds of the words signify as much as the words themselves. There is the quote in the Indian epic of the Mahabharata that reads, "Pustaka tu ya vidya parahastagatam tanam, karya kale samputtapanne, sa vidya na taranam." Knowledge that exists in a book and money that one has lent to someone else is not knowledge and is not money, because when you need it, it's not there. We need to study what was available to Indian readers, what if it was read, how it might have been read, and why. We need to consider what Trivedi calls non-existent knowledges. They seem to be non-existent because they are not produced according to accepted or intelligible methodologies, or because they were produced by absent people. Scholarly attention in related subjects such as book and graphic design history has increasingly turned to global interconnection, intercultural encounter, and negotiation. These new approaches have striven to to bring out the enmeshed kind of cultures across the world, the way that things are constructed when people cross cross-cultural barriers. They also give voice to unheard voices. And this is my final example. Hortus Malabaricus, meaning the Garden of Malabar, is a comprehensive treaty that deals with the properties of the flora of the Western Ghats in India. It covers Kerala, Karnataka, and Goa. Written in Latin and compiled over 30 years, the book was conceived by Hendrik van Reed. Apart from the Latin, the plant names include Malayalam, Konkani, and Urdu. The work was compiled and edited by a team of over 100 people, many of whom were Indians, who provided key ethnomedical data about the plants, nomenclature, drew them, etc. They're never credited, and nor do we know what they felt about the process. As Fraser has pointed out, the texts exist before they became books. And the knowledge in the subcontinent, like the Murthy Library, remains inaccessible to Indians unless it gets translated. Similarly, you could see the different languages here. Similarly, the many voices on a title page used to tell us about the multitude of people involved in a project and give us different histories and practices in approach to text. As a typographer, my aim is to use intention within context as my reason. In re-looking and reforming my heritage as a part of a critical and reflective process for myself. What provides the spine or rationale for the journey is the design for the act of reading in all of its various forms and environments. So I have to say to you, please recall Bonaventura de Souza Santos's call for transformation and the statement about typography as a fundamental way to understand and engage with the world. I ask you too to go back to your own biases, heritages, and rethink them and reform them. This is not work that can be resolved within a single body of knowledge, but multiple bodies of knowledge. It needs all of us. I will leave you with the very first words of written text that we know to exist in India, that of Emperor Ashoka. All men are my children, and what I desire for my own children, and I desire for their welfare and happiness both in this world and the next, that I desire for all men. You must attend to this matter. Arigato gozaimashita. Thank you.